major developments in Minnesota's fraud crisis, specifically related to childcare. Here's the latest.
We believe the state of Minnesota has allowed scammers and fake daycares to siphon millions of taxpayer dollars over the past decade.
The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services says it's freezing child care funds for Minnesota after a YouTuber claimed to uncover fraudulent centers in a viral video.
So after YouTuber Nick Shirley dropped a now viral video that has gone viral both on X and on YouTube that reportedly showed multiple instances of Somali daycare fraud, people in the Democratic Party, Somali community representatives, and of course the mainstream media have been doing everything and anything they possibly can in order to try to debunk this. However, when you actually examine these so-called debunkings, what you ultimately end up figuring out is that they are sincerely lacking, much in the same way that these daycare centers are lacking children. So I think it's important for us to talk about this today. But before we do, I want to thank everybody who supports this channel via actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money. Okay.
The state gets about $185 million in federal funds each year. The HHS Deputy Secretary says he's demanded Minnesota Governor Tim Walz audit those centers featured in the video. The governor responded on X, saying this is Trump's long game. We've spent years cracking down on fraudsters. It's a serious issue, but this has been his plan all along. He's politicizing the issue to defund programs that help Minnesotans.
So obviously a viral video reporting to show hundreds of millions of dollars being stolen by Somali scammers in the state of Minnesota is not going to look good for Governor Tim Walz, who of course was on the VP ticket for Kamala Harris, and in addition to that is currently running for a third term as governor, as he knows if he doesn't get that seat locked up, he's going to be considered completely irrelevant as a presidential candidate in 2028. So of course he releases a statement where he talks about how, oh my god, we're dealing with fraud all the time in the state of Minnesota. We're the best at tracking fraud. Trust us, bro. And in reality, the real issue is not what was demonstrated in the video. It was actually what is being politicized by the right wing. And by the way, Tim Walz actually called at one point in time investigations into Somali fraud white supremacy.
This is what happens when your own federal government wages war against you. This is what happens when they target communities for their own benefit. This is what happens when they scapegoat. And this is what happens when they no longer hide the idea of white supremacy, the idea of white supremacy, the idea of white supremacy, the idea of white supremacy.
Now, it's important for you guys to understand that none of this is true. Obviously, it is not white supremacy to look into fraud to discover that an ethnic group happens to be behind said fraud. But in addition to that, the state of Minnesota has been wholly derelict in their duty in sussing out and prosecuting fraud. And this has been demonstrated multiple different times, but most recently on a CBS News segment where they had a prosecutor who covered this district for the Biden administration and one from the Trump administration. They both pointed out that Governor Tim Walz and his administration had to be looking the other way in order for this fraud to progress.
These are federally funded programs. They happen in every U.S. state. What happened here in Minnesota that allowed this fraud to materialize, to metastasize?
It appears that the people at the highest levels of responsibility in the government of the state of Minnesota looked the other way.
Again, the overwhelming majority of the Somali fraud cases are not being prosecuted in the state of Minnesota. They're not being prosecuted by Attorney General Keith Ellison. They are being prosecuted by the federal government. The investigations are launched by the federal government. Usually they're tipped off by on-the-ground local news reporters, and the Tim Walz administration has been completely inept in stopping this, and a perfect example of the way that they've allowed Somalis to use their identity in order to loot their treasury was the Feeding Our Future scandal, which was actually discovered by the Minnesota Department of Education. However, when they wanted to stop payments because they knew that the kids' names that were being randomly generated via a name generator were not actually students in Minnesota public schools, the Somalis ended up suing for racial discrimination, so payments ended up continuing during the time where they were working out this racial discrimination lawsuit. So they had the information. Feeding Our Future is the largest COVID fraud discovered in the United States of America thus far, and yet the payments continued due to the fact that the Minnesota state government was protecting the Somalis and again ignoring their own agencies and their red flags in order to placate this particular minority. But again, Tim Walz calls investigations into that white supremacy. Now, of course, I will point out that the Feeding Our Future fraud ended up leading to the autism fraud, which showed that Somalis actually got 1 in 16 of their own children in their community diagnosed with autism. This is why Minnesota's new autism program in that state ended up having their costs jump from $1 million to $200+ million in just a 7-year period. Yet again, this is all being ignored, swept under the rug, and guess what? The local news media that used to do an absolutely wonderful job investigating these daycare centers is now running cover for those same very centers. So get a load of this segment right here, where they purport to show us that there were actually children's in these learning centers, and there's nothing to see here, nothing to worry about.
You want to make ready for kindergarten.
This is ABC Learning Center in Minneapolis.
They have to learn ABC and numbers.
Director Ahmed Hassan gave WCCO a tour after finding his daycare in the national spotlight.
All right, we've arrived to ABC Learning Center.
In a now viral video, right-wing YouTuber Nick Shirley claims nearly a dozen daycare centers in Minnesota are taking public funds but not providing a service. He says ABC Learning Center is one of them, knocking on the door in mid-December.
I would like to check a child in a daycare.
Hassan says his employee didn't respond because Shirley was in a group of about 8 people, and his staff were concerned about recent ICE activity.
So look, this clip is actually the second facility that was visited by Nick Shirley throughout the course of him filming this video.